Hey everybody, Tony Goldmark, aka Some Jerk with a Camera here. I've gotten several requests to do a commentary for my Back to the Future The Ride review in time for October 21st, 2015, Back to the Future Day, and I am nothing if not a complete slave to anyone who says they like me, so here goes. So for the benefit of those who haven't seen the Back to the Future trilogy a million times, and hello to both of you, this opening scene is a reference to the opening scene of Back to the Future Part 2, where they couldn't get Claudia Wells, the actress who played Jennifer, so instead they replaced her with Elizabeth Shue and hoped no one would notice, even though by this time Elizabeth Shue was already a really well-established actress. She'd been in Adventures in Babysitting and Cocktail and, of course, Body Wars at Epcot. And I thought, wouldn't it be insane if I referenced that by reshooting the last scene of my ABC Goes to Disneyland video, but with a really bad Elizabeth Shue mask over the Luke ski puppet, like the one you see before you in all its glory. We originally shot the final scene of ABC Goes to Disneyland in like April of 2013 when Luke was in town on his LA trip that was immortalized in his song Because of Bob, which is in fact available on 4th Grade Talent Show, the album he plugged earlier. Then in October of 2014, Luke was in town again for a friend's wedding, and I told him, look, you don't have to if you don't want to, but here's this idea. You don't have to go to the trouble of making an Elizabeth Shue mask for your Luke ski puppet, because I can easily cut the scene if you just don't have the time or whatever. But he did, and we reshot the scene on the exact same street corner where we shot the final scene of ABC Goes to Disneyland. Of course, now Luke Ski lives in LA, or Burbank rather, so go visit him if you get the chance. Now, as proud as I am of this scene, and as proud as I am of the whole Elizabeth Shue joke, I'm not sure this was the wisest way to begin not only my Back to the Future The Ride review, but also the entire third season, because not only is it this esoteric movie reference, but it also references the final scene of an 8-part retrospective, which who knows how many people even got all the way through that, but I haven't gotten any complaints so far, so there you go. Becky Hopkins made this incredible Some Jerk with a Camera Season 3 typography, so thank you very much, Becky. So since this was my first ever episode on a Universal attraction, and also my first ever episode about Universal Hollywood in particular, I thought it only fitting that before I get to the actual ride review, I spend a little bit of time introducing the park itself and talking about some of the broad strokes of what separates it from Disneyland, besides about 50 miles of highway. By the way, that shot we just passed of the tram looking at the explosions and shit, that shot comes from a Universal Hollywood commercial, and it is a complete lie, ladies and gentlemen. I've ridden the tram dozens of times. At no point is that part of the tram tour. If they ever are filming anything on the lot, the trams will sidestep them, and while they're sidestepping them, make everyone in the tram stay quiet, by the way, because quiet filming in session, so that shot is a complete bullshit marketing fabrication, man. And when we got this shot at the base of the Universal Hill, I actually said $4 cheaper, because at the time Disneyland admission was $96. And then literally that day at lunch, someone checked their phone and found the news headline, Disneyland raises one-day price to $99, and we didn't want to go all the way back down the hill just to reshoot that shot, so instead I just added that graphic there and covered it up. And this shot of the LA subway I got at like midnight one night. I rode the LA subway specifically so I could get this shot. I rode it a few stops, then got off and intended to turn around, and a couple of Metro employees came down and told me, the line's closed for the night, you gotta go up and take a bus back. And of course it was the middle of the night, so each bus only ran like once per hour, and it took me like 3 hours just to get back to my car at the park and ride. And here's J.D. DeMott of Comics Are Awesome and Kevin Anderson, a.k.a. Arthur Knowledge of Quest for Geekdom. Both shows can be found on geekvision.tv. And they both visited Disneyland in Los Angeles and the whole area in February of 2014, over a year before this video came out. And I really wanted to put them both in the video, even though I hadn't even written it yet. So I kind of wrote this scene just because I figured no matter what, this will be my first video away from Disneyland, so I'll just have them complaining that I'm not at Disneyland. So I kind of let the tail wag the dog on this one, and I even changed quite a bit of my response dialogue, especially after I got picked up on Channel Awesome. So like I said, I wanted to open the episode with an introduction of Universal, but I didn't want to get into the history of Universal because Spazmaster had already done this amazing retrospective of the history of the park, which you should all go check out. It's on YouTube. Just go. Pause this video and then go watch Spaz's Universal retrospective if you have not already. I don't have anything to say about the next 40 seconds, so ladies and gentlemen, I proudly present Dueling Bob Gales.
It wasn't a foregone conclusion trying to figure out what exactly 1955 the sequel was going to be. The year, again, we were stuck with the ending of the first movie, and it was also 1955 then. We couldn't start the years went by the way the first 4 years later that we actually got to. But we had a real serious older brother and older sister because the whole point of the first movie was age of his parents, that they would be in high school in 1955. But 1955 was important because we wanted Marty to invent rock and roll. That was one of the ideas that we had real early on.
The Nostalgia Critic, a.k.a. Doug Walker, ladies and gentlemen, who I have still, as of this recording, not yet met in person. But one of the perks of being on Channel Awesome is that you get to contact Doug Walker and ask him to do cameos for you. And so far, at least with me, he has said yes. It's always a bit of a crapshoot whenever you're sending someone a script and just expecting them to direct themselves from wherever they are. But Doug, for the most part, just got it. Like, tonally, he was flawless in everything he did. There are a couple of minor complaints that I have. Like, in this joke in particular, I always pictured him pulling up some enormous book like the dictionary or the Yellow Pages or something, and he pulls up this little black binder, which it still works. It's just not quite what I had in mind. But, you know, the dude has to create a new Nostalgia Critic video every 2 weeks with an editorial in between, so far be it from me to say, hey, this book doesn't look like I wanted to. So for these auditions, this was the first thing I ever thought of for the episode. I don't know quite what I based this off of, but somehow I got the idea that if I did a Back to the Future the Ride review, something would compel me to have someone play Doc Brown in it as like a side character. And then I thought of having, you know, the various other reviewers and friends I'd made over the years just audition for who gets to do it. And I gotta pay special attention to Linkara's fat grandma, Doc Brown. That was just... If you listen carefully, you can actually hear me start to crack up just as he's saying, who's Doc Brown? Anyway, when I got accepted to Channel Awesome, that added the new twist of, well, Channel Awesome is making me do this now. But I literally started shooting these in 2012. In June of 2012, a dozen or so internet reviews... Dr. Demento, ladies and gentlemen! Probably my second biggest cameo I've ever gotten, second only to Weird Al. I got Dr. Demento to do that cameo at FumpFest 2014 in Wheeling, Illinois, and it's always a thrill working with that guy because he is a living legend. So anyway, in June of 2012, a dozen or so internet reviewers, myself included, all converged in San Francisco to shoot a budget-impaired horror sci-fi comedy film called All Critics Must Die, which to this day has still not been released. They have been working on it off and on, mostly off ever since. Hopefully it will get released someday. But anyway, while we were all in the same time and place, I thought, well, when else is this going to happen? And I had my friend Morgan bring a white wig, and one by one we all did bad Doc Brown impressions in front of my camera, and finally, almost 3 years later, I actually released the video with them in it. So I think this might take the record of the most time between when the footage was shot and the footage was released, at least until All Critics Must Die finally comes out. That'll break the record. When I started working on the video more earnestly, I brought a different, better white wig to MagFest this past year, and also to MarsCon this past year, to get bad Doc Brown impressions from both my reviewer and comedy music friends to make the audition montage even longer. So now I'm finally, after all those intros, getting into the history of the Back to the Future ride. And it is interesting how the Back to the Future ride was basically Spielberg's entry in a pissing contest against George Lucas. It was in many ways just developed as an act of one-upsmanship against Star Tours, and it worked. I think it definitely beat Star Tours in just about every way. In fact, in Sam Genoway's book Universal vs. Disney, there's a passage about the opening of Back to the Future the ride, which George Lucas was invited to, and one cast member recalls Spielberg and George Lucas getting off the ride. Lucas looked pissed. and Spielberg was grinning ear to ear. And this Marvin Land joke was one of the first specific jokes I thought of for the episode. I just knew I had to do some sort of reference to your cousin, Marvin Berry, because that moment is probably the single stupidest moment in the first movie. I mean, it can't compete with the sequels, especially Part 2, but it's kind of brilliantly stupid. It's perfectly stupid in its own way. I have to imagine Chuck Berry was on the other end of that phone call saying, "Bitch, I came up with that a year ago." Click. I recently bought the Back to the Future coffee table book that just came out in honor of the 30th anniversary, and that book has a whole chapter on the making of the ride, which has tons of historical tidbits that I didn't even know about when I was making this review. Like, apparently the original version of the ride that was commissioned, they hired some other people, not Douglas Trumbull, but someone else, I forget their names, but the demo version they produced of the ride film was much more lackadaisical, much more boring. It was more like Soarin' across time, basically. It's like, the DeLorean's flying, and uh-oh, there's a dinosaur, and hey, let's go visit Leonardo da Vinci, and let's see the Old West. And it was just, Zemeckis and Gale in particular really didn't like it, because they were looking for something that could one-up Star Tours, basically. They were looking for something exciting, and the original demo just didn't cut it. So they hired Douglas Trumbull, and the rest is history. So earlier in this shot, I mentioned the Back to the Future the Ride commercials, which I distinctly remember seeing in 1993 when the ride opened in Hollywood, but I scoured YouTube and couldn't find any trace of them, so you gotta step up your game, YouTube. I don't quite have everything yet. So Douglas Trumbull is a legendary special effects pioneer. He did the effects for 2001: A Space Odyssey, among other things. And the ride was very much backwards engineered. Trumbull and his team did the ride film first without really knowing what the story was going to be, or why we were chasing another DeLorean, or even who was in that DeLorean. And Peyton Reed was really brought in to fill up all those gaps and make the story make some semblance of sense, even though it still doesn't really make sense, but Peyton did the best he could. And I just couldn't resist this Kirk Cameron joke. I know it's only tangentially related to the ride itself, but how ironic is it that Kirk Cameron, this notorious religious zealot, is promoting these movies that say the future isn't written and we actually have control over our own destinies? And by the way, that scene in the special where he promotes the ride was cut out of the Blu-ray for some reason. I guess because by the time the Blu-ray came out, the ride was not at the theme parks anymore, but it was still a special feature on the Blu-ray, so I don't know why, but I had to dig out my original Back to the Future DVDs in order to get that clip. And this Captain EO joke is especially appropriate now that it looks like the Disneyland Captain EO is closed for good. Everyone pour one out for the spinning rock. And for the music here, there was no other choice but Total Eclipse of the Heart. Turn around, bright eyes indeed. And I'd like to say that was the same rock I used in my original Captain EO review, but that would be a lie, because it is not. I am no good at keeping track of anything. And now more dueling Bob Gales.
I remember talking to the engineer of the train because we had these explosives in there.
In fact, in that early draft,
Jesus, what happens if we derail this train? So I asked him, is there any chance that the train could derail? And he did it when he hit
in New Mexico.
And he just looked at me and
that was the climax of the
he
movie.
laughed. And then he said, I've waited my whole life to do this.
So in this shot, as I leave frame, you can see in the reflection right there that I'm not really running away. I just left frame and then stopped. And for those who don't know, that is the location in Disneyland where they used to have the Fantasyland Skyway stop, but now they have nothing because one too many idiots would spit on people from the Skyways and try to fall out into trees and get money from Disney, and they had to get rid of it, and I miss it very dearly. Citizen Kane reference, obviously. And apparently Doc Brown invented the bad green screen at the same time the Wright brothers invented the aeroplane. And thank God he did, because I used the bad green screen quite extensively in Part 2, as we'll see. Steal Forrest Gump's life like it was a box of chocolates to steal from a baby boomer. Try wrapping your head around that line. If you think it's hard listening to lines like that, you should try writing them. And this Zemeckis montage was a lot of fun to write and edit. Of course, if I was doing it today, I'd have to work in some reference to tightrope walking across the World Trade Center towers in order to get to the Beatles hotel room or something like that. And this does contain references and clips of literally every feature film that Robert Zemeckis ever directed, even the really shitty mocap ones. And that, of course, is me on the tram tour in front of Courthouse Square at Universal Studios, which, of course, for Back to the Future Parts 1 and 2, served as the real Hill Valley. I knew I had to get something in front of that, but I knew it had to be a really short line of dialogue because I wanted to get as many takes of me saying it as possible before the tram left that location. The people sitting in front of me thought I was crazy for just saying, "What a coincidence, me too," over and over and over again. And speaking of Courthouse Square, all those shots of Doc Brown walking around the 2015 Courthouse Square, like this one, were made possible because Universal left that 2015 Hill Valley set up in that courtyard for a couple of years after they finished shooting the movie, just because they knew it would be a really cool stop on the tram tour. I was really confused by that the first time I saw this ride, because I knew the ride didn't open until a year and a half after the movie, but then I saw some YouTube footage from like 91 or 92 of the tram tour where 2015 Hill Valley was still up. It would have been even cooler if Megatron was in the background of this shot, because it would have been even stupider of me to discuss a MacGuffin really loudly in front of Megatron, but Optimus Prime still works, and really the important part of the shot is that you see that there's a huge crowd behind me. And I didn't have a real joke for this bit about Doc Brown's other inventions, but I just really wanted to point out that this guy looks like John Linnell of They Might Be Giants. I always thought he did, and otherwise there's no reason for me to even bring up that part of the pre-show where they use footage from old industrial films. And by the way, that visor joke about wearing it to poker night and losing money and all that, that was suggested by Jared Rosenfeld, a.k.a. Rosenhacker. And both that and I think this Nibbler joke came out of some brainstorming sessions I had with my friends. When I was writing this a couple of times over Skype and even a couple times in person, I gathered together a bunch of my reviewer friends and just kind of brainstormed ideas for this review and also asked their opinion about jokes that I wasn't quite sure about. Like, is this funny? Is this not funny? I won't keep this unless you really love it. I won't lose this unless you really hate it. You know, that sort of thing. And I had to call forward, as it were, to my Escape from Tomorrow review, which I am still working on and which will be released hopefully very soon. But when I started thinking about the whole one day into the future thing and the implications of that, it was just, I couldn't resist. That's Some Jerk with a Camera's Escape from Tomorrow review, coming soon. So this quote-unquote scene with Doug Walker was actually cobbled together from a couple of other scenes between both him and me. I didn't reshoot any of the footage to add it. I just got the footage of me saying what and the footage of me just kind of thinking for a minute. And then I used the clip of him saying, "How the hell do you expect to do 2 videos at this rate?" From that line I got from a scene that wound up in part 2, which I'll get to when I get to that scene, but I decided it was funnier to just cut from him saying that to me thinking for a moment to the Michelle, Full House to be continued thing, which I will never get tired of using. I will be dead in the cold ground before I stop using that shot for every single time I have a multi-part episode that requires a to be continued title. And I knew I wanted to reprise the doc audition thing in part 3, and I thought, wouldn't it be fun to involve some people who watch this show? So I did this Show Me Your Doc contest. This was a real thing. People could send in their YouTube videos of their Doc Brown impressions, and I got quite a few of them. I got about 24 or so. And they're all in part 3, and I'll discuss that when I get to the commentary of part 3. That'll be out on Friday, and I'll release part 2 of the commentary tomorrow, and I'll see you then. And until then, ladies and gentlemen, because you demanded it, an encore of Dueling Bob Gales.
We realized that what we had here was 2 movies. And in between
this is where we made
takes,
this good
they would
news, bad
just jam
news
with the
phone
local
call
musicians. So
to Sid
we had
Sheinberg in the
music
studio.
going all the time in between
They'd wanted
setups.
Back to the
They were
Future
just a
2 out
great
for
bunch of
summer
guys.
1989.
The manager,
And that
he was
wasn't
kind
going
of
to
a
happen
handful.
because
He had
Bob
never
had been working
seen
on Roger
either
Rabbit,
Back
and
to the
that
Future
turned into
1 or 2. I think
hell
the
of a
band
bigger production
but
than anybody
he
ever
had
thought. So
and
we kept pushing back.
one of the
Back to the
jobs
Future
of
2
the
because of that.
producer is to keep
So we
bullshit
called up
away
the
from
studio
the
and we
director.
said, here's
So
the good news, the
my
bad
job
news.
was to
The
keep
bad news is
ZZ
we're not
Top's
going to have
manager
Back to the
away
Future 2
from
for you
Bob
till summer
while
of
ZZ
1989.
Top was around.
The good news
And he
is
had it in his head
we will have Back
that
to the
somehow
Future
we
2
had
for
to
you
have
for
the
Christmas
ZZ Top
1989.
car
And we'll have Back to the Future 3
time
for
travel
you
vehicle.
in the summer
And
of
he was talking my
1990.
ear off about
We took the
why
220-page
the ZZ
script
Top
and
car
condensed it down to
belonged
160
in this
pages.
movie. I couldn't even understand it was a period
Sheinberg
movie.
had that one, and
the next night
threw it
the
down and
head
said,
of music
"This is the
from
most
Universal
expensive movie ever
flew up
made,
to
and
location
I'm not
because he wanted
making
to
it."
hang out with
So when
ZZ
the
Top.
budget came in for
So
this
I cleverly
version of
maneuvered
that
it so that
included
he
fourth
got to
act of
spend.
This last cold tag was yet another absolutely insane idea I had, which I told Luke, you don't have to do it, but he did, and it's really stupid, and I couldn't love it more. And for those who don't get the reference, it's a reference to the opening shot of Adventures in Babysitting, and now you know.